President Donald Trump in the Oval Office of the White House in Washington. President-elect Donald Trump and his wife Melania Trump are greeted by President Barack Obama and his wife First Lady Michelle Obama, upon arriving at the White House in Washington, D.C. before being sworn in as the nation's 45th president during an inaugural ceremony at the U.S. Capitol. President Barack Obama greets President-elect Donald Trump on the West Front of the U.S. Capitol. Attendees line the mall as they watch ceremonies to swear in Donald Trump on Inauguration Day in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Donald Trump sings to the song "My Way" while dancing with First Lady Melania Trump during the inaugural Liberty Ball at the Washington Convention Center in Washington, D.C. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer makes a statement to members of the media at the James Brady Press Briefing Room of the White House in Washington, D.C. This was Spicer's first press conference as press secretary, where he spoke about the media's reporting on the inauguration's crowd size. U.S. President Donald Trump congratulates senior counselor to the president Stephen Bannon during the swearing-in of senior staff in the East Room of the White House in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Donald Trump shakes hands with James Comey, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI), during an inaugural law enforcement officers and first responders reception in the Blue Room of the White House in Washington, D.C. Prime Minister Theresa May with U.S. President Donald Trump walk along the colonnade at the White House. U.S. President Donald Trump signs an executive order in the Oval Office of the White House February 9, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Prior to signing the three executive orders, Trump participated in the swearing-in ceremony for new Attorney General Jeff Sessions, along with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, and Sessions' wife Marie, II. Muslim women protest against U.S. President Donald Trump on. In Chicago, Illinois, counselor to the president Kellyanne Conway checks her phone after taking a photo as U.S. President Donald Trump and leaders of historically black universities and colleges pose for a group photo in the Oval Office of the White House before a meeting with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence in Washington, D.C. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel and Ivanka Trump talk before a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump and business leaders in the Cabinet Room of the White House in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Donald J. Trump gets in the driver's seat of an 18-wheeler while meeting with truck drivers and trucking CEOs on the South Portico prior to their meeting to discuss health care at the White House in Washington, D.C., USA, the 23rd of March 2017. The House of Representatives has yet to vote on the Republican-crafted American Health Care Act that would replace the Affordable Care Act, as it remained unclear whether Republicans had enough votes to overcome opposition from Democrats and those within their own party. EPA, Jim Loscalzo, U.S. President Donald Trump delivers remarks from the Truman balcony with First Lady Melania Trump and their son Barron Trump during the 139th Easter egg roll on the South Lawn of the White House in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Donald Trump speaks while flanked by House Republicans after they passed legislation aimed at repealing and replacing Obamacare, during an event in the Rose Garden at the White House in Washington, D.C. The House bill would still need to pass the Senate before being signed into law. U.S. President Donald Trump visits the Western Wall, the holiest site where Jews can pray in Jerusalem's Old City. Pope Francis walks along with U.S. President Donald Trump and U.S. First Lady Melania Trump during a private audience at the Vatican. European Council. President Donald Tusk, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, U.S. President Donald Trump, Italian Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni, French President Emmanuel Macron, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, British Prime Minister Theresa May and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker posed for the group photo at the G7 Taormina summit on the island of Sicily on May 26, 2017 in Taormina, Italy. Leaders of the G7 group of nations, which includes the United States, Canada, Japan, the United Kingdom, Germany, France and Italy, as well as the European Union, are meeting at Taormina from May 26 to 27. U.S. President Donald Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin shake hands during a meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. Incoming White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci talks with reporters during Regional Media Day at the White House July 25, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Conservative media outlets were invited to set up temporary studios on the north side of the West Wing so to interview White House officials and members of President Donald Trump's cabinet. Sen. John McCain, RS, leaves the Senate chamber at the U.S. Capitol after voting on the GOP skinny repeal healthcare bill on July 28, 2017 in Washington, D.C. 3 Senate Republicans voted no to block a stripped-down, or skinny repeal, version of Obamacare reform. U.S. President Donald Trump looks up toward the solar eclipse while joined by his wife First Lady Melania Trump on the Truman balcony at the White House on August 21, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Millions of people have flocked to areas of the U.S. that are in the path of totality in order to experience a total solar eclipse. U.S. President Donald Trump gestures during a rally at the Phoenix Convention Center in Phoenix, Arizona. An earlier statement by the president that he was considering a pardon for Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County who was convicted of criminal contempt of court for defying a court order in a case involving racial profiling, has angered Latinos and immigrant rights advocates. 11-year-old Frank FX Jacho L gets a pat on the back from U.S. President Donald Trump, while mowing the grass in the Rose Garden of the White House September 15, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Jacho, from Falls Church, Virginia, who runs a business called FX Mowing, wrote a letter to Trump expressing admiration for Trump's business background and offered to mow the White House grass. President Donald Trump waves as he arrives at the Muniz Air National Guard base for a visit after Hurricane Maria hit the island in Carolina, Puerto Rico. The president has been criticized by some that say the government's response has been inadequate. U.S. President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau pose for photographs after Trudeau's arrival at the White House in Washington, D.C. The United States, Canada and Mexico engaged in renegotiating the 25-year-old North American Free Trade Agreement 7 of U.S. President Donald Trump's 8 border wall prototypes are shown near completion along U.S.-Mexico border near San Diego. CA former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort gets into his car after leaving federal court, October 30, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Paul Manafort and Rick Gates have been indicted by a federal grand jury in the investigation into alleged Russian meddling in the U.S. election. U.S. President Donald Trump pours fish food out as Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe looks on while they were feeding carps before their working lunch at Akasaka Palace in Tokyo, Japan. China's President Xi Jinping, and U.S. President Donald Trump review Chinese honor guards during a welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. U.S. President Donald Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, their son Barron, National Turkey Federation Chairman Carl Wittenberg and his family and members of the Draper County, Minnesota, 4-H Chipotle pose for photographs after Trump pardoned Drumstick, the national Thanksgiving turkey in the Rose Garden at the White House in Washington, D.C. Following the presidential pardon, the 40-pound White Holland breed, which was raised by Wittenberg in Minnesota, will then reside at his new home, Gobbler's Rest, at Virginia Tech. President Donald Trump and the First Lady Melania Trump attend the 95th annual National Christmas Tree Lighting held by the National Park Service at the White House Ellipse in Washington, D.C. The Beach Boys, Wynonna, the Texas Tenors, Craig Campbell were among the artists who provided the entertainment. Michael Flynn, former national security advisor to President Donald Trump, leaves following his plea hearing at the Pretty Man Federal Courthouse in Washington, D.C. Special counsel Robert Mueller charged Flynn with one count of making a false statement to the FBI. U.S. President Donald Trump signs a proclamation that the U.S. government will formally recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel after signing the document in the diplomatic reception room at the White House December 6, 2017 in Washington, D.C. In keeping with a campaign promise, Trump said the United States will move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem sometime in the next few years. No other country has its embassy in Jerusalem. U.S. President Donald Trump cuts a symbolic piece of red tape during an event at the White House promoting the administration's efforts to decrease federal regulations in Washington, D.C. The administration has vowed to remove 2 regulations for every single regulation added in an effort to reduce the amount of bureaucratic red tape. U.S. President Donald Trump pauses during a speech at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, D.C. The president was expected to outline a new strategy for U.S. foreign policy through the release of the Periodic National Security Strategy, a document that aims to outline major national security concerns and the administration's plans to deal with them. U.S. President Donald Trump, flanked by Republican lawmakers, celebrates Congress passing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act on the South Lawn of the White House on December 20, 2017 in Washington, D.C. The tax bill is the first major legislative victory for the GOP-controlled Congress and Trump since he took office almost 1 year ago. A Palestinian protester throws a stone during clashes with Israeli forces near the Hawara checkpoint south of Nablus in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, as protests continue in the region amid anger over U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as its capital. U.S. President Donald Trump shakes hands with White House physician Rear Admiral Drive Ronnie Jackson, following his annual physical at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland.